Number 3. Creepy. True. Craigslist Horror Stories. Volume 2. Story 1, The Antique Mirror. My name is Dana. I was 29 years old, living in Richmond, Virginia, working as an interior decorator and spending most of my free time hunting estate sales and Craigslist listings for unique vintage pieces I could either use for clients or resell at a modest profit. I had been doing this long enough to have good instincts about what was worth pursuing and what was not. The listing I found on a Thursday evening said antique floor mirror, ornate wood frame, early 1900s, approximately 6 feet tall, free to anyone who can move it must go this weekend. The poster said her name was Constance. She included 2 photographs. The mirror was genuinely beautiful. Dark carved walnut frame with floral relief detailing along the top arch. The kind of piece that sells for several $100s in the right shop. I messaged Constance immediately and she responded within the hour. She gave me an address in a neighborhood called Church Hill on the east side of Richmond and said I could come Saturday morning. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you have ever taken something into your home that made the whole space feel different after it arrived, because what came with that mirror changed the next 4 weeks of my life in ways I am still not entirely comfortable talking about. Stay with me. I want to give you the full picture of why I was so eager to get there Saturday morning. In my line of work, free antiques of genuine quality are essentially currency. A floor mirror in that condition could anchor an entire room design or be sold to a client at $300 or $400, which at the time was $300 or $400. I needed badly. I had a client presentation coming up, 2 projects running simultaneously in a van already loaded with moving blankets. When Constance said Saturday, I had mentally already loaded the mirror before I hung up the phone. Church Hill is one of Richmond's oldest residential neighborhoods, dense with 19th and early 20th century housing, narrow streets, tall trees, the specific weight of age that accumulates in a place where people have been living in close quarters for over 100 years. Constance's house was a Victorian row house on a steep block with a wide front porch and window trim that needed repainting. I parked on the street at 9 a.m. and carried my moving blankets up the porch steps. Constance answered before I knocked. She was around 70 small, with white hair pinned back and a manner that was precise and deliberate in the way of someone who measures their words before spending them. She thanked me for coming and held the door open without fully stepping back from it, which meant I had to angle slightly sideways to get in. I noticed that the way you notice small things when you're paying attention to a space professionally. The interior of the house was dense with antiques. Every surface held something: books, figurines, framed photographs, ceramic pieces, small wooden boxes, the accumulation of a long life in one place. The mirror was at the end of the front hallway, leaning against the wall, where the hall opened into the living room, exactly as tall as the listing had suggested. Up close, it was even better than the photographs. The carving on the frame was detailed and hand-done individual petals on each flower, no two exactly alike, the kind of work that required a craftsman with serious patience. The mirror glass itself was old, with a slight wave and silver-gray depth of antique glass that has not been replaced. I ran my hands along the frame and told Constance it was a remarkable piece and asked if she knew its history. She was quiet for a moment, and she said it had been in the house since the house was built. She said it had belonged to the original owner and had passed through 3 families before it came to her 40 years ago with the house when she bought it. She said she had kept it in the hallway for 40 years and had covered it with a cloth for the last 6 of them, and that it was time for it to leave. I asked why she had covered it. She looked at the mirror, not at me, and said that after a certain age, you stop wanting to see certain things. I assumed she meant her own reflection, which is a sentiment I understood, without needing more explanation. I did not push further. I got the mirror loaded into the van with the help of a neighbor who happened to be on the sidewalk and offered to grab the other end. Constance watched from the porch but did not come down the steps. When I drove away, she was still standing there, hands folded in front of her, watching the van. I installed the mirror in my own apartment that afternoon because I did not yet have a client placement for it, and I wanted to see it in full light before I decided where it was going. I put it against the wall in my bedroom, which was the only room with enough clear floor space for something 6 feet tall. It looked extraordinary. The light in the room at that time of day hit the old glass at an angle that gave the reflection a particular quality, slightly warmer than a modern mirror, slightly softer, like looking at a version of the room that existed just slightly elsewhere. I went to bed that night and I slept badly. Not dramatically, not waking up screaming or anything like that, just badly. The shallow, interrupted sleep of someone whose brain will not fully release into rest. I had a series of half dreams that were more like impressions than narratives. A hallway, the smell of something old, a door that opened onto another door. I woke at 3 a.m. and lay still for a while and eventually went back to sleep. The second night was similar. The third night, I woke at 2:40 a.m. and the room was quiet, and I lay there with the specific alertness of someone who has been woken by something rather than waking naturally. I looked at the room. The mirror was across from the foot of the bed. The angle of it from where I lay meant I could see the reflection of my bedroom door in it, which was closed, and the reflection of the window, which showed the ambient light of the street outside. And nothing else, because there was nothing else in the room. I watched the mirror for a moment the way you watch something when you are still half asleep, and then I turned over and pulled the blanket up. On the fourth night, I woke at the same approximate time, and this time I sat up. I looked at the mirror. My own reflection looked back at me from across the room. And behind my reflection, in the reflected image of the room behind me, the bedroom door was open. I turned around. The door was closed. I turned back to the mirror. The reflected door was closed. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while with the lamp on and told myself what you tell yourself in those moments, which is that half-awake perception is not reliable, and that old mirror glass has optical properties that can produce visual distortions, and that I had been sleeping poorly all week, which was its own explanation for everything. I put the lamp on a timer set to run until 6 a.m. and eventually went back to sleep. A week later, I had a client visit my apartment for a consultation on a separate project. She walked through the space, making notes, and stopped when she reached the bedroom doorway. She stood there for a moment without going in and said something felt off in that room. She was not a dramatic person. She was an architect with a precise and rational way of engaging with spaces. I asked what she meant, and she said she could not specify it, just that she was aware of the room in a way she was not aware of the others, the way you become aware of a sound you cannot quite locate. I called Constance that evening. The phone rang 7 times and then she answered. I said I wanted to ask her more about the mirror. She was quiet for a moment and then said she had been wondering how long it would take me to call. She told me then what she had not told me when I picked it up. She said the woman who had owned the mirror in the 1890s had commissioned it to be made after the death of her husband. She had been reported by neighbors in the years following his death to speak to the mirror, directly holding conversations with it at night. The neighbors had assumed she was grieving and slightly eccentric. She had lived alone in that house for 22 more years and had never removed the mirror from the hallway, and had left specific instructions in her estate that it was to remain in the house. 3 subsequent owners had kept it. The family who sold the house to Constance had covered it with the cloth she had eventually inherited along with the piece. They had not explained why. Constance had uncovered it once in her first year in the house, and had covered it again the same week and had not touched it since. She said she was sorry she had not told me any of this before I took it. She said she had been afraid I would not take it, and she had needed it out of the house. I moved the mirror out of my bedroom that night and put it in the van. I drove it to an antique dealer I knew in Carytown the following morning and sold it for $125 and told the dealer it was a beautiful piece with an interesting provenance and left it at that. I slept without interruption that same night for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. I have never since taken an antique into my home without asking why the previous owner is giving it away. The answer to that question is the most important information in the entire transaction. Constance knew something I did not know. She had lived with that mirror for 40 years and covered it for 6 of them, and she had needed it out of her house badly enough to post a free listing and hand it to a stranger on a Saturday morning. When someone is that eager to give something away, the price of free is not actually free. Story 2, The Kennel Help. My name is Ryan. I was 24 years old, living in Raleigh, North Carolina, studying veterinary technology at Wake Tech, and looking for any animal-related work experience I could log alongside my coursework. The Craigslist listing said, kennel assistant needed part-time weekends, must be comfortable with large dogs, $10 an hour, cash. No formal experience required, but must be reliable. The poster said his name was Warren, and that he ran a small, private boarding kennel on a rural property outside of Garner, about 20 minutes south of Raleigh. I messaged him on a Wednesday evening, and he called me back within the hour. He sounded exactly like what the listing suggested. An older man who ran a small operation and needed dependable weekend help. He told me to come by Saturday morning to meet the dogs and see if it was a good fit. Stay with me and tell me in the comments if you have ever taken a job that felt completely legitimate right up until the moment it did not. Because Warren's kennel was real and the dogs were real, and the first 4 Saturdays were completely normal. It was the 5th Saturday that I cannot stop thinking about. I drove out to Warren's property on a Saturday in late October at 8 a.m. The property was a legitimate rural operation. A main house set back from the road, a large outbuilding behind it that had been converted into kennel space with individual runs along both interior walls and a fenced exercise yard off the back. Warren was around 65, deliberate in his movements, clearly experienced with animals. He introduced me to the 8 dogs currently boarding and walked me through the feeding and cleaning routine. Everything was clean and properly maintained. The dogs were healthy and well adjusted. I started the following Saturday and worked 4 more weekends without any concern. The routine was straightforward. Arrive at 8, feed and water the dogs clean. The runs spend 30 to 40 minutes with each dog in the exercise yard, log everything in Warren's binder, collect my cash at the end of the day. Warren was usually somewhere on the property, sometimes in the kennel with me, sometimes working on equipment in the yard, sometimes in the house. I did not require supervision, and he did not hover. The 5th Saturday I arrived at 8 and Warren was not there. His truck was in the driveway, so I assumed he was in the house, and went ahead and let myself into the kennel building. With a spare key, he had given me. I started the feeding routine. I was halfway through when I noticed that the run at the far end of the right-hand wall, which had been empty the previous 4 weekends, was now occupied. The dog inside was not like any of the other dogs Warren boarded. The others were family pets, retrievers, a couple of labs, a standard poodle, a shepherd mix, well-socialized animals, comfortable with strangers. The dog in the end run was a male large, some kind of mastiff cross, and he was not reacting the way the other dogs reacted to my presence. He was absolutely still watching me from the back of the run, with an alertness that was not aggression and not fear. It was assessment. He was reading me the way trained dogs read people. I finished the routine and went to knock on the main house to let Warren know I had arrived and to ask about the new dog. No answer. I knocked twice more. I tried the handle. Locked. I went back to the kennel and looked at the end run more carefully. The dog had a tag on his collar, not a standard pet tag, a flat metal tag with no name on the front, only a number stamped into it, and on the back, a logo I recognized from my coursework. It was the tag format used by law enforcement and military working dog programs for service animals. I took a photo of the tag with my phone, then I looked at the run itself. The latch on the outside was a standard kennel latch, but on the frame of the run on the inside, there were scratch marks in the paint at nose height and lower, the kind of marks a dog makes when it has spent significant time pressing against a door trying to push out, not the restless marks of a bored pet. The systematic marks of a dog that has been trained to work and is currently not working and knows the difference. I texted Warren and said I had arrived and had a question about the end run dog. No reply. I waited 20 minutes. Still nothing. I drove to the Garner Police Department and showed an officer the photograph of the tag. He looked at it carefully and asked me to wait. 2 hours later, I was still at the department and 2 other officers had joined the conversation. The tag number corresponded to a working dog from a program in a neighboring county that had been reported stolen, along with a department vehicle 11 days prior. The vehicle had been recovered. The dog had not. Warren was located at a property in Johnston County that afternoon. The investigation that followed is part of the Wake County and Johnston County public records. What I was told in general terms was that Warren's kennel had been used on at least 2 prior occasions to hold animals that were not legitimately his to board. The private kennel, in a rural location, was a functional holding space with plausible deniability. Dogs come and go from boarding kennels. Neighbors expect to hear them. The dog was returned to his handler the following Monday. I was told by the handler's supervisor that the dog was in good physical condition. I think about those scratch marks on the inside of the run, the specific height and pattern of them. A trained working dog pressing against a door is not the same as a pet trying to get out. It is a dog doing what it has been trained to do, which is find a way through an obstacle applied to the wrong side of a door in the wrong place entirely. I finished my veterinary technology program. I work at a legitimate clinic now with verified employment and licensed practitioners. I have never since taken a cash animal care job without verifying the operation through state licensing records, which in North Carolina are publicly accessible and take about 3 minutes to check. Warren's kennel license had lapsed 18 months before I started working there. I did not check. That is the 3 minutes I did not take that put me in the middle of something I am still processing 2 years later. Year story 3, the roommate application. My name is Andrea. I was 32 years old, a paralegal living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who owned a 2-bedroom condo in the uptown neighborhood and had decided to take on a roommate to offset my mortgage after a financial rough patch following a difficult year. I wrote a detailed Craigslist listing. I described the condo accurately, the rent amount, the house rules, the neighborhood. I asked interested parties to respond with a brief introduction, their employment situation, and references. I got 22 responses over the first week. I filtered them carefully the way someone with a legal background filters things, and invited 4 people to come see the space. The third person who came to view the condo was a woman named Melissa. She was 35, a marketing coordinator, well-spoken, and organized, with 2 references she offered immediately, without being asked. She saw the condo on a Tuesday evening and followed up with a thank you email the next morning. She was not the flashiest candidate, but she was the most methodical, and the references checked out, and I offered her the room. Tell me in the comments if you have ever let someone into your home and gradually realized you understood less about them than you thought you did. Because Melissa was in my condo for 6 weeks before I found the notebook, and the notebook is the reason I am still awake sometimes at 2 in the morning 3 years later. Melissa moved in on a Friday in February. She was a considerate housemate from the start. Quiet, clean, respectful of shared spaces, prompt with her portion of utilities. We were not close in the way of friends, but we were compatible in the way of 2 professionals sharing a space with clear boundaries and mutual respect. She kept to herself in the evenings, and I kept to myself, and we intersected in the kitchen in the mornings in an easy and uncomplicated way. The first thing I noticed about 2 weeks in was that Melissa kept very precise track of my schedule without appearing to. She never asked directly about my comings and goings, but she was always aware of them. If I came home 20 minutes earlier than usual, she would be in her room with the door closed before I reached my floor in the elevator, as though she had anticipated the early return. If I stayed later than usual, she would have the kitchen to herself for exactly as long as I was gone. The precision of it registered the way a recurring decimal registers a pattern that emerges from enough data points without anyone drawing your attention to it. I told myself she was simply a private person with good situational awareness. Some people are like that. The second thing I noticed around week 4 was that my mail was being opened and resealed. Not obviously, not carelessly. The flap of each envelope was resealed with a precision that would not have been visible to someone who was not paying attention, which I was, because I handled legal documents professionally and was accustomed to looking at paper for signs of tampering. 3 pieces of mail in 1 week. A credit card statement, a letter from my building management, and a piece of personal correspondence from my sister. All resealed. None of the contents appeared to have been removed or altered. Someone was reading my mail and then replacing it. I said nothing to Melissa. I moved my mail delivery to a P.O. box that week without explaining why, because I did not yet have enough to explain. I began paying careful attention to the physical condition of things in the shared spaces, whether items were moved and replaced, whether cabinet doors that I had left ajar were later closed, whether the positioning of objects on my desk in the living room, which I sometimes worked at in the evenings, changed between my leaving and returning. They did. Not dramatically by fractions, but consistently. I installed a small camera in the living room position to show my desk area on a Thursday evening while Melissa was at work. I did not tell her. I watched the footage over the following week. Melissa had been in my desk during my absences on 4 separate occasions over the 7 days of footage. She was methodical and unhurried, each time working through the drawers with the deliberate patience of someone who had done this before. She photographed documents with her phone. She read through files. She replaced everything precisely as she had found it. I watched all 4 sessions without moving from my couch. On the last session in the footage, the one from the previous Tuesday, Melissa had done something none of the prior sessions had included. She had opened the drawer where I kept a spare apartment key, held it in her hand for a moment, and then placed it back and closed the drawer. She had been checking whether I kept a spare key there. I called a locksmith the following morning before Melissa was awake and had the lock changed while she was at work. The locksmith asked no questions. I left her new key with my building manager in an envelope with her name on it, and a note saying the lock had been updated and her new key was at the front desk. Then I called a Minneapolis police detective I knew professionally through the law firm where I worked and described the full sequence of events. He listened without interrupting and then asked me two questions: whether I had retained the camera footage and whether I knew Melissa's full legal name. I had the footage. I gave him the name from her rental application, which she had completed in full. The name she had given me was not the name she had been using in her professional life before moving to Minneapolis. She had relocated from a city in Wisconsin where an investigation into financial identity fraud had been ongoing for 11 months, connected to a scheme involving the theft and use of personal financial documents obtained through close personal access, specifically through living arrangements with individuals whose financial profiles matched specific criteria. My profile matched those criteria: a single professional homeowner with a legal background, an organized document system, and predictable work hours. Melissa had not found me by chance. She had responded to my Craigslist listing because my listing told her with considerable accuracy exactly what kind of person I was and what kind of access living with me would provide. I gave the camera footage to the detective. Melissa was investigated in connection with the Wisconsin case and the Minneapolis inquiry. She was out of my condo within 48 hours of the lock change, which she did not contest, taking only what she had brought in. I checked my credit and financial accounts exhaustively over the following weeks. I found no fraudulent activity, which the detective said was consistent with cases where the access phase is interrupted before the usage phase begins. She had been building towards something she did not get to complete. The notebook I mentioned at the beginning. I found it in the closet of her room when I cleaned it out after she left. A small spiral notebook, the kind you buy in a pack of 3 at a drugstore. Inside were dates, times, and single-line observations, all in a precise, small handwriting. Every entry referred to me, my schedule, my habits, the contents of specific documents she had photographed, notes about the financial account she had been able to partially read from statements. The last entry was the Tuesday of the key drawer session. She had written the word spare with a question mark next to it. I kept the notebook and gave a copy to the detective. The original is in a file in my desk drawer right now. The drawer with no spare key in it. I have never relisted that room. I pay the full mortgage myself. It costs me more than I would like, and I have never once considered the alternative. The notebook is the thing people always ask about. They want to know if it was scary to read. The answer is that it was not scary in the way of something sudden. It was scary in the slow and cumulative way of understanding entry. By entry, how long someone had been watching you before you noticed. Every date in that notebook was a day I had lived normally, moving through my own home, in the ordinary way of someone who believes they are alone when they are not. 39 entries over 6 weeks, 39 days of being observed in my own space by someone I had invited in because the references checked out and the thank you email came the next morning. And I had been methodical about the process in the way that a person with a legal background is methodical. The methodology was not the problem. The problem was that Melissa was more methodical than I was. She had been doing this longer, and she was better at it, and she had chosen me specifically because my listing told her exactly how to be. Read your own listing before you post it. Read it the way someone who wants access to your life would read it. Everything you put in a Craigslist listing is information. The neighborhood, the professional background, the organized household, the predictable schedule. Every detail that makes you sound like a good housemate also makes you sound like a good target. to someone who is looking for exactly what you're describing. 39 entries. The last one said spare with a question mark. I'm glad it stayed a question.